And we're still having a few people who are coming in, so maybe we'll wait a couple more minutes.
And Mary, I can definitely just, I've been seeing the prompts, so I can just let them in too.
Well, I'm just thinking that we'll wait, since there are several people, maybe we'll just wait a couple of minutes. So it's sort of like popcorn, when it stops popping, then you, and maybe we have reached that point. So, my name is Mary Richards, and I've been asked to facilitate this meeting. My co-hosts that I have designated are Leanne Wilson and Allison Grundy. And so, if you have just entered in the last minute or so, we are recording this meeting, just so you're aware of that. So, I am so glad that you're all here. We have 32 people here so far. That's great. I want to introduce the members of the um, of the supplemental input committee. And to me, rather than saying the supplementary input committee, it just means trying to get more people in the community to know about what the city is planning to do in terms of um, trying to deal with climate planning and getting the input from all kinds of people. So this is supplementary in that that committee is not part of who's actually going to make the decisions, which is city council. So we have several people here tonight, and I'm going to ask you to raise your hand as you're introduced. We have 2 pages of people, so you may have to switch back and forth to make sure that you see everybody. The civic nonprofit area is being represented by Melissa Murray and Bob Howe. There's Bob. And Pat Sauer. I have not seen Pat come in yet, but I believe Melissa and Bob are both here. Non-city government is Latifa Faisal. Hi, Latifa, who is one of our Story County supervisors, and Nancy Franz. There's Nancy. Okay. Our faith community representative is Allison Grundy. Now, is there anybody else here that we've missed who is also on that supplementary input committee?
Bob Haug isn't he also?
I named him.
Oh, you did. Okay, you're right, you did.
We already did. Okay, so the input gathering process is that each of those people, as I understand it, is to try to gather as much information as they can from their designated group. And I guess lots of, to me, I think we need to gather input from the whole community, not just these designated groups, because there are going to be some people who are interested who don't fall into one of these groups. So I hope we have some of those people with us tonight so that they can put their 2 cents in. So the first part of our presentation before we do the discussion is that Leanne is going to introduce the basic idea of community action plans, show you the City of Ames Community Action Plan website, and where to find the Ames Community Vulnerability Assessment and the greenhouse gas inventory, which are things that the city has already done in preparation for this community action plan. So, Leanne, I will turn this over to you, and you're going to use your screen share, correct?
I am indeed. And you should all now be seeing my last slide. No, I want to show you the first slide. Okay, so this is going to be a very short introduction to the Ames Climate Action Plan and the process that is being used to try to reach a plan, a consensus on a plan. I wanted to start by mentioning that the Ames has been very forward-looking and has done a lot of things already that help in the direction of reducing emissions from the city of Ames. What you should get from this slide is not every single word that's typed on there, but just that there are a lot of words in various categories. They've established leadership and hired people to do things. They've been working on sustainable power, sustainable transportation, improved resource recycling and recovery, and some other incentives. And all of these are ongoing efforts that will happen with or without a climate action plan, but a climate action plan will strengthen these efforts. So why is it important for a city to have a climate action plan? Well, one of the reasons is that that about 70% of the emissions actually come from cities. That's where 55% of the people live, but 75% of the emissions. And cities make many of the relevant decisions about that affect how much emissions there are. Building codes, transportation, zoning and urban sprawl, waste management, disposal, all of these things are things that tend to happen at the city level or the city, county, or city-state levels. And sometimes cities like Ames are the source of electric power or natural gas. And so that also affects net emissions. So cities are a key role. If cities don't pitch in and do things, we're not going to be able to deal with the climate crisis. Cities must step up. We won't be able to do everything, but if we don't do anything, it won't happen. There's also a consideration about why we should have a strong climate action plan. And the logic there is a fair share logic that says that areas that have the capacity to do more often have those resources thanks to prior emissions. In other words, we live relatively well, in part because our country has been able to use a lot of fossil fuels to do a lot of things. And now it's our turn to try to help mitigate the effects of that history. So another reason, well, we really need to try to keep the climate from warming more than 1.5 degrees since the 1800s. 1.5 versus 2 degrees or 2.5 may not sound like very much, but it makes quite a bit of difference in a number of critical areas. And here is a series of examples of what happens at different temperature increases. The gray band here is 2006 to 2015, where the temperature increase was. We're a little bit above that now. You can see that we're well into the very dangerous for warm water corals, for low latitude fisheries, for the Arctic. Those are all places that are struggling, and coastal flooding. But if we get up to 1.5 degrees, things get worse. And if we get up to 2 degrees, quite a few more things get into a very critical level. So there's a lot of things that become much worse if we let it get up to 2 degrees. We need to keep it down below 1.5. So what is the process? How do we go about adopting a climate action plan? Well, the city started the process very sensibly with a greenhouse gas inventory and a vulnerability report. This was done by the Pale Blue Dot consultants. They used as their reference years 2014 to 2018. And they computed all the ways that we are emitting carbon gases, the CO2 and other greenhouse gases, and came up with a detailed report. And the vulnerability report says, these are all the bad things that can happen to us if the climate gets away from where it is. More droughts, more floods, more vector-borne diseases, more heat waves, more power outages, all kinds of things. And then after they had a chance to digest that, they hired another consultant. The Sustainability Solutions Group was hired to translate a goal into a plan. And the two entities that are involved, as was mentioned before, are the Supplemental Input Committee of Citizens and the City Council as the steering committee. And those are the two entities that have the most responsibility when it comes to moving the process forward. And so what does it mean here, translating goal into a plan? Well, these were some examples that the SSG presented to the city and the Supplemental Input Committee as to what the city might choose to set as a goal. So here, the blue line is what they call business as usual or business as planned, where they include only those things that are already happening or already funded. So things that you know are going to happen, nothing new. Now, normally there will be new things that brought in with or without a plan, but they don't include anything new. This goes down because ISU is going to be transitioning from coal to natural gas. And then it comes back up because the population of Ames is anticipated to grow by about 15% by 2040. So that's what's going on here. Then these two plans are kind of, what's the minimum we can do that fits with the overall requirements that are set by the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, for keeping the temperature down. And all of the plans that keep the temperature down come to zero net emissions by 2050, and they are reduced by something like half by 2030. And then this purple one is what's called a fair share or carbon budget one that looks a little more carefully at where have the emissions come from, how much can we afford to emit going forward, and how can we distribute the responsibility for dealing with that among the different countries and cities and towns. This is also what the C40 cities folks mostly are committing to, is something like this purple line. Now, what's relevant here is the area below this curve is the total amount of emission. And below the purple curve, there's about half as much area as below these two. And below these two, there's about half as much area as below the business as usual. So these are substantial reductions that are proposed. And there's a fourth one that is not shown, because what they mean by evidence-based is that you go out and hunt for projects, and then you see what that adds up to. And so rather than saying we'll make this goal and then we'll go see how we do it, we'll see how we do it and then we'll make the goal. The way a goal ends up being turned into a plan is that they go through and they look at all the different things that one might be able to do to reduce emissions, persuading people to have more electric vehicles, getting more wind and solar into our electric system, changing details of how we handle our waste so that we produce less emissions there. A lot of different things that could be done. And then you add those all up. And this is the curve you come up with. So you start here, you end up with this curve down here, and this gray area, that's the emissions that you're still putting out there over the next couple decades. So this gray part's the bad stuff. And you want the gray part to be as small as possible for the best possible plan. It's also interesting that they showed this diagram, which shows what happens when you start with a goal and try to figure out how to make it, is that you have a few items that are kind of big items, but many, many small items get put in. And I like to say that we really are not going to solve the climate problem without 101% solutions, because most of the solutions, if you push them to try to be a big piece, they have too many bad side effects. And so you can just see that in action here. People, this city has a goal, and they found many little things they can do that add up. This city went with the bottoms up, the evidence-based plan. And what happens when you do that is you tend to focus on the fewer items that have the biggest impact. You don't tend to look so much at the tiny ones. And so you get a very different pattern out. So that's another aspect of the problem right there. So then where can you find more information? Let me take you to the City of Ames website, where there's a page on sustainability. And it talks about what's a climate action plan. There's a link here to click on to get to and I'll show you where that takes you in a minute, but it's important to see what's down below. There's a place to get the greenhouse gas inventory, to get the vulnerability assessment, to get the renewable energy potential study, to get some record of some of the earlier meetings. Those are all accessible down here below that link. Now, if we go to that link, we get to what the SSG group is maintaining. They had a survey that was supposed to have ended on the 10th, so I don't think that's still active. Then they take you down here. There's a project schedule, upcoming events, frequently asked questions, and documents. And the documents include recordings and notes from various sessions It's a little bit out of date. They haven't got the December ones up yet, but you can get in there and you can actually go through all the things that have been going on in working towards this. Now, back here, there's another place where you can get some background. I've been working hard to try to translate some of these details in especially the quantitative details, the math part, into something that might be a little more accessible, or at least another perspective on things. And that's this. And I don't know why it always does that. I have to go here. And the ACAT website has my blog by the numbers. And it has, for example, here's one about what's a fair share target. Here's trying to describe the 4 scenarios that SSG presented for the city, talking about where they get their science-based goals, talking about the greenhouse gas inventory, talking about the climate vulnerability study and the solar electric potential. And I'll be adding more things to this over the next weeks as well. So that's another place where you can get some information. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'm perfectly happy to take questions at any point, including through chat on anything that I've covered here.
Thank you very much, Leanne. And perhaps, I think maybe it would be best if we just go through Chris's presentation as well. And then if anybody has questions, please put them in the chat and we'll see about whether we can just address those right now before we go to the discussion of all of the rest of you who have joined. So, Chris, do you want to unmute and give us your part of the presentation?
Yeah, thank you very much. And Allison, can you just give me a thumb up if you're hearing me okay? All right, so I'm mic'd and I'm good to go. And may I share my screen? Is that possible here?
Yes, please do.
Great. Okay, I am showing 2 slides, maybe 3, from a presentation that will be made tomorrow. And again, my name is Chris Anderson. I recognize quite a few of you on here, and that's really great to see all of you again. Haven't gotten out to see everybody yet since COVID is starting to allow us to get out more, but so it is good to see you here tonight. And as my blurb describing my experience indicated, I've worked with other cities across the United States, but primarily in the Midwest, on climate vulnerability and climate action plans. And one of the things I want to reiterate is, with a half dozen to maybe 10 cities I worked with in the Midwest, they all viewed a climate goal as an aspirational goal. This is a little bit different way of thinking than people typically have when it comes to city projects or city infrastructure and capital. Typically, a project is identified, and then you have to figure out how much it's going to cost and whether it fits in the budget, and then build a process from there. And so this is a very different process. It's meant to reflect in those cities the aspirations and the values that they place. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I was really glad, though, to see Leanne point out that the consultants had showed 2 types of ways that people had gone about to find how to reach their goals. One was kind of the evidence-based way, where they did look for projects that they could implement. And the other was the aspirational, where they set a goal and then they thought about all the different ways they could potentially find little bits and pieces to reach that goal. So the evidence-based way is equally relevant as any way that we want to take in setting a goal. So when you provide your feedback, it's critically important to your supplemental input committee person. What is your perspective? Is it one of aspiration, or is it one of evidence-based project planning? So in either case, what I want to point out is that Ames already has a pretty nice record of sustainability activity. And what's really important, and this is critically important, is that very little of the sustainability activities we have taken has been entirely on our own dollar. We have had federal programs and other investments in our community that's allowed us and allowed the city to offer different types of programs and also to implement new pieces of infrastructure that have allowed us to be more sustainable. And this slide gives a bit of an overview of some of the high points along the way. I'm wanting to share it like that. And so aside from just the physical act of putting carbon in the air, we also have other things like the leadership and the tone that we're taking in our community and presenting to the world. And early on, we've seen environmental leadership in Ames. As it lists here, sustainability is built into the mayor and the city council annual goals. This is something where they set things that they want to accomplish over the next year that project to the world that Ames is a sustainable and moving more and more into a sustainable community. That's a very attractive thing, especially for younger generation folks. And you can see some of the things they've done in the past in the far left box. One of the things that's critically important to greenhouse gas reductions is our power plant and our energy generation. This is one of our primary sources of emissions in the city. The other primary source of emission is going to be our transportation. So our power plant and our transportation will determine much about how we are able to reach the goal that gets set in the climate action plan. Some really big examples of what we've done in the past is come off of coal, and that was completed in 2016. And that allowed our carbon footprint, or the amount of emissions that we've had, to be drastically reduced by 40%, in fact. 43%, I think, is the actual number. And then we also had, in 2009, purchased wind energy, 36 megawatts of wind energy. And so I just want to point out, especially, that the wind energy would not have been possible to purchase if there hadn't been federal incentives that enabled people to invest in wind energy, investors to invest in wind energy, and wind energy to be able to generate energy at with a credit attached to it. And those two financial incentives had a lot to do with the availability of that sustainability infrastructure. There are a few other things in here. I don't want to go into them because I just want to get into not only have we had in the past some help getting to what we've achieved so far, but now going forward, there are substantial opportunities being put out. And so here they are. This is a slide that very briefly summarizes most, but not quite all, of the different federal incentives that are being proposed or that have already been enacted. So what you see on this slide on the left-hand side is a brief description of the federal incentive. In the middle, its implication for the Ames Climate Action Plan, basically how it helps us. And on the right is a little bit more detailed about how it could actually be specifically a resource within our community. And so starting on the left, you also see some of these are italicized. The italicized incentives are things that have already been passed. These are already laws, and these are already dollars that are going to be spent. And so what that means is, from the infrastructure bill, some of what we need to accomplish in achieving whatever goal we set is already out there for us to go and make ourselves as attractive as possible, find the partnerships we need to have, and implement and bring in these resources. I'll go over this probably in about 2 more minutes, and then I'll stop. And then we can go ahead and let questions come from the group to maybe to identify some more details that people want to know about these things. There are basically 3 areas where the incentives can really impact the climate action plan. One is in transportation emissions. And I said earlier that in our greenhouse gas inventory, our transportation emissions is one of our top 2 emitting sources. The second is in electricity generation emissions, and that is our other top 2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in the state, in the city. So the transportation emissions have been addressed a little bit with some incentives, and these primarily have to do with building infrastructure for networks of alternative fuels. And these alternative fuels include like an electric vehicle network of chargers. They include grants to enable communities to purchase more electric buses. They also have grants to enable diesel buses to have retrofits. And as an example of that, the company I work for now, Renewable Energy Group, has a partnership with the city to do a retrofit of diesel heavy duty trucks in the city. So if you needed to see with your own eyes what that might look like, you can look through the city pages. I also know that Cyride has procured 2 electric buses through federal grants prior to this infrastructure grant. They're in the process of selecting who the vendor of those buses will be. So pretty soon you'll also see what full electric buses look like in our city. What I want to point out is what's already been passed is not just grants to change our transportation network, to change our transportation mode, but also what is new is grants to help out with manufacturing. And I think this is where there's an opportunity not just to have greenhouse gas reductions in a climate action plan, but also to think about, can we attract to Ames, Iowa, new clean energy manufacturing business and new clean energy jobs? We already have a really nice representative of some clean energy businesses in Ames. One is, for example, at the football field, where they have Mid-American Energy having its marketing campaign, and also Renewable Energy Group. These are 2 very large companies in Iowa who are clean energy technologies. And it would be really nice if perhaps some of these second generation and advanced clean energy technologies like battery manufacturing, or maybe more important, battery reprocessing and recycling in Iowa could find a home in Ames, Iowa. So we have incentives not just to change our modes of transportation, but we also have incentives for making the manufacturing of the materials we need for our new modes of transportation quite a bit less expensive. And that provides us with an opportunity to think about whether Ames can benefit from this from an economic development perspective. 2 more things to point out. One is there's about $500 million in low income help. This is primarily in the infrastructure grant, which means it's primarily for people who need assistance paying for electricity. It's the High Leap program. But amidst all of these programs that I list here, there are lots and lots of situations where low income and disadvantaged communities are provided a boost. And the way they do that is a tax incentive of a company that proceeds in these areas to use this infrastructure, and these incentives can get a bonus if they are able to deploy their technology within an area of low income or disadvantaged communities. So I'm leaving the list up for a little bit longer, just so everybody can finish reading it. And I really don't want to explain anything else about this. All I want to say is when Ames invested in its wind farm back in 2009, it was one built by a separate party up near Zering. It's because they had energy tax credits. And just as I described earlier, for having tax credits already in place for new modes of transportation and infrastructure to allow those modes to be fueled, the energy generation tax credits are similarly in the hopefully forthcoming Build Back Better Act, and they are layered more deeply and across the full production chain, meaning the manufacturing, as well as the construction, as well as the investment and production of energy. So it's a much bigger incentive than we had back in 2009 when we first invested in wind energy. So that's the last I want to say, because there are details that I'm sure people would like to know, and it's hard to anticipate ahead of time what that might be. And I'm going to turn back to our moderators and let the questions start to come forth. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Chris. Both of you have, I think, done a fabulous job. Since we have 2 pages of people and I can't see everybody on my screen all at once, what I'm going to suggest is that if you have a question or a comment for the presentations of either Leanne or Chris, you unmute your microphone, because that will toss you to the top of my participant list, and I can tell that you want to ask a question or make a comment on what they've said. So if you would if you would do that, I would appreciate that. And Irv Kloss is the first one that I see here.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you, Chris. That was a good summary of what can be done for reducing emissions. But there's also another question, another problem, and that is, how do we remove carbon dioxide that's already in the atmosphere? And there is many solutions to that. One in particular I can think of is plant trees. And we could increase our urban forest by, I guess, probably a few thousand, if not a million trees. And that would be a great check off on the reducing that atmospheric CO2. And the other thing is that carbon sequestration in the soil is another place. And we need to increase our organic matter, and we have to ask our farmers to do a better job of regenerative agriculture so that we can use that source of sequestration as well. And there's possibilities for incentives to be, cash incentives to be paid farmers to do that. So thank you all.
Hey, Irv, I have a quick comment on that. First, I agree about your assessment on trees. We in Ames are a tree city. That's our designation that we have. It's a formal program. And every year we plant trees in Ames. This year, there was a little extra money to be able to plant trees because of the damage done by the derecho. And the Trees Forever group allowed or enabled more money to come into the community to plant some more trees. But a really good number to keep track of. Here's a really good number for Ames. If we increased our urban canopy, the number of acres that we have treed, that the canopy covers the ground in Ames, if we increased our urban canopy by 20%, that would offset the city's emissions, not the entire community, but what I mean is the city government emissions, the city government emissions from buildings, from its transportation, such as the transportation including Cyride, heavy duty vehicles, other vehicles that the city uses. So 20% is how large we would have to expand our current urban canopy to offset our city government emissions. And agreed with what you're saying about agriculture. And it's just really unfortunate that a very bipartisanly supported bill in the Congress has been sitting on the sidelines for most of the year because it just hasn't been brought forth as a priority. This is called the Growing Climate Solutions Act, and its intent is to establish the tools necessary to enable farmers and educators of farmers and outreaches of farmers and third-party auditors working with farmers to be able to standardize and implement tools so that they can more easily enter carbon credit markets and, for example, perhaps provide carbon offsets for the city of Ames. But that bill, as I said, even though it has 93 senators who have supported it, has not been able to come forth in the House. And so that's really unfortunate. And it's hopefully going to be one of the first things that comes about after the Building Back Better Act gets passed. Those are my two comments, and I appreciate that you brought it up. There's hope there too. Just it's not as fast as we would like to see at the moment.
Okay, I am going to do some of the questions from the chat, and I will ask both Leanne and Chris if you have comments, or anyone else. I know we have some other people who have real expertise in this area. I would ask you to join in. This question says, some of the least efficient housing is occupied by some of the poorest members of our community. I am referring to the trailer court. What kinds of programs could we tap into to create alternative housing for these members of the community? And of course, this person is saying that housing in Story County is already prohibitively expensive. And I think if we haven't been, somewhere with our head in the sand, everybody knows that. So either Chris or Leanne or anyone else who has some insight into that.
I cannot speak directly to different types of housing, but there are, again, incentives in the Build Back Better Act that would enable electrification to be prioritized at low-income housing. And I don't know exactly how that would be fleshed out in Ames, for example, because I'm not that enough familiar with all the different US codes that are listed within the program. But I will say, it's a sizable amount of money in the hundreds of millions of dollars of money that's intended to go to low income electrification. I don't know if that in Ames means that you could find a program that would allow a trailer park community or a low income housing group, or say fixed income housing, to be able to purchase into, say, our community solar program, or if it would have to be something about installing directly on site. Those kinds of details I don't know yet, but there really is money available in the appropriation. And what is needed is our city staff, or people who are able to help our city staff, be up to speed on how that money gets filtered through the specific programs that are under the appropriations.
There's a program in Dubuque. It's not directly answering your question, but they're providing solar panels for houses that are owned, but at the low end of who is owning houses in terms of income. People who are really living hand to mouth, but managed to own a home. And what they're doing there is putting together a package that combines some federal rebates with some grant support and some carefully structured loans from banks, so that people can buy into solar power for their house and then benefit from the lower energy bills that result, and the difference in the energy bills helps pay off the loan. So in the long run, they end up better off. There's a lot of people who don't have the cash flow to do something that would be helpful in the long run, and there are programs that can do things like this that can help that get over the hump, so that you can actually get the benefit of the investment with some help to get the cash flowing. So there's a lot of creative stuff going on out there to try to help with those kinds of situations.
There's another question that talks about where are we with waste stream recycling and composting in this community? And it has lots of specific items there. I think Bob Haug is probably the person who has looked at that subject the most. I don't know whether you would be interested in commenting on the potential for us to reduce our carbon emissions through that channel or not, Bob. If you have to unmute.
Yep, there we go. Yeah, well, one thing that we can definitely do is to start composting as a city operation. The Iowa State does this. The city does it. Many other cities have composting facilities locally. Generally pay for themselves. Right now, when people take their buckets of waste to the resource recovery plant, if you're familiar with that program, to get what I refer to as the wet waste out of the waste stream, that material is currently being sent on 200 miles to Minnesota, a 400-mile round trip for the waste that we're bringing to the resource recovery plant. We need to be doing that. We need to be doing that locally. So that's one thing. And then in general, I don't think we're going to be able to make a really big impact on emissions, or at least starting a plan, until the city comes to grips with what they're going to do with the current incinerator, the burning waste in the existing power plant. The city has a study that's going on externally to design or to bring, to help them choose one of 4 new incinerators that would reduce emissions, just because we wouldn't have to be burning all that natural gas with our waste. But whether that's the right solution or not, I don't know. Hopefully we can make those decisions quickly. And I think what Chris has pointed out is that there's a lot of sources for funding a lot of the things that we need to do. The city just needs to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We can't afford to have come forward and be met with the response that, well, we don't have time, we don't have the resources. The city ought to be funding a climate office that can handle some of these studies and to look for funding opportunities. There's a lot of things that we can do to reduce emissions that not only don't cost much, they return big dividends. So those are my comments on that.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Let's see, Latifa, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to address a question about the trailer parks and just stress that I think there are ways that we can help the folks in trailer parks make their homes more energy efficient. I think they are a really valuable, affordable housing option for some folks in Ames and in Story County. And I just wanted to point that fact out, that I think there are ways that we can help make that alternative more energy efficient while we're trying to find other solutions.
Okay, thank you, Latifa. Now, I think we're going to go ahead to the very open-ended questions that were posed for these information gathering sessions. The first of those questions is, what is important to consider when setting a greenhouse gas emissions reduction target for the community? Now, you can see what I mean in terms of it being extremely open-ended, but if anyone here, on the basis of the things that we've heard so far and that you know about from your own investigation of subject matter, if you have something to contribute, please, as we said before, either you can go down to the reactions button on your computer that's down in the same line as mute, stop video, security, participants, etc. Over on the right, there's reactions. And if you click on that, you'll see the raise hand. That's what Latifa did, I noticed. So the other option, as I say, is to unmute your microphone, and that will bump you up to the top of our list. That's a very helpful way to do it as well. So Irv, I see that you have unmuted again. You have something to contribute with regard to this question.
I say that the number one question is haste. We've got to move fast. You saw what happened this past weekend in Kentucky and the other 5 states. Do we want that to happen here? I can see Ames leveled just like Mayfield, Kentucky was. And we don't have time. We've got to move quickly.
Yes, we sort of had a little taste of that with the derecho about a year ago. So, who else would like to comment? Remember, what this group is supposed to be doing is providing input to the people that I introduced earlier, who are going to take this information back to City Council when they're making this decision, and to the SSG group.
really like, hi, sorry, this is Amy Erica Smith. I really like Leanne's expression about 101% solutions. I think it's a really great way of thinking about the problem. And I think it's important right now for us to set ambitious goals because, as Leanne said, the more you set ambitious goals, the more likely you are to be able to think of creative solutions that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
Thank
I
you.
think ambition and putting everything on the table right now is really important.
I think thinking about the psychology of the approach is important. Thank you, Amy Erica. Loris Olson, you have your hand up.
Hi. So this is kind of an awkward topic for some people here, but it has to be affordable. And when I say affordable, I mean that we have to make the commitment to put money behind it. Okay. And that, so I agree with Irv. We need to get things done as soon as possible and creativity. I like that, but you have to be able to afford it. And so that is at some point, the costs have got to be really discussed. And I say this as a former small business owner, as a former elected official that got to work with a budget, and now as someone who's just trying to develop a few units of housing for really low income people. Money, it always seems to come down to money. Thank you.
And I guess I would say that we should recall what Chris was telling us about the availability of some sources of funding at the federal level, and making sure that we tap into all of those sources. Who was it? Was somebody, maybe it was Chris, who said we need a city office that's specifically related to climate action, and that would be one of the things that they would be charged with, is looking at all the ways that we can find funding to do these things.
Yeah.
Janet?
If I'd like to comment on that too, which is that, yes, there will be a fair bit of money and people time that has to go into this. But some of it will be an investment, because a lot of the things that need to be done that save on emissions also save on energy costs. And so if you invest in solar, then it pays for itself over time. If you invest in geothermal, it pays for yourself over time, and so on. So sometimes the problem to be solved isn't, do we have the money, but can we move it around in time or in space so that it is where it is needed, when it's needed, and it will pay itself back. And so we have to be careful when we talk about costs to distinguish things that are where you actually go out and spend the money and the money is gone and it never comes back, from things where we put the money in and some of it comes, or most of it, or all of it, or even more than all of it comes back ultimately.
Thank you. Janet? It says you're unmuted, but I'm not hearing you. No, we're still not hearing you. And I know that you're unmuted because that's what it says here. Check the microphone that you're using. Maybe that's the problem.
Well, and Janet, you're welcome to make a comment in the chat and we will record it that way. Thank you.
Okay, Ralph? Oh. And Ralph, we don't hear Ralph either. What's going on?
Ralph, you're muted.
It just I unmuted it and it just went back on. Thanks. I guess repeat, I'm happy if Janet gets her voice, she can interrupt me. I wanted to ask about specific policies that take action that convey a sense of urgency, which really piggybacks on what Irv said, and which we know pushes people a little bit. At times, I think that the plan is patting itself on its back, like we've already done all this stuff. And you read some of the plan and it talks about how things are sustainable, and they're not sustainable. The university relying on natural gas is not eventually sustainable. The solid waste plant is not sustainable. We're not 50 years ago, but it's not sustainable today. And so I would like to see it that it's not just a sustainable plan, but it's more actions and words. And I think there's a lot of cost benefit analysis that have been done already. And we, maybe it's political pressure, but I think we can push the city to do more. And I think there's certain philosophies, like if you contribute to the problem, you should help contribute to the solution. And we include considerations for people who are lower income and disparate income impact on people. But we've had greenhouse gas inventories for 20 plus years required by the state. And it seems that every few years we come up with some new source of fuel or some new thing, but we can start right now. And I'd like to be able to see more than words, but to say, well, Irv used the word haste. I just talked about a sense of urgency.
Thanks very much, Ralph. Either Carolyn or John, you have your hand up there.
Right. I want to do the talking on this one. Carolyn shares my view. I think that we want to circle back to Bob Haug's idea that we have some person hired to dedicate their time and energy to solving climate action issues. And I see this as a person who's at the department head level for the city and who will be evaluated in terms of job performance by the amount of funding that they can find and bring to the city for climate action, by the number of plans that they can develop in concrete form and implement as part of a climate action plan, and as someone who sits at the table when budgets are prepared annually with a proposal for an effective, concrete, effective budget for climate action involving ultimately the mixture that the city always brings together for funding, a mixture of property tax funding and grant funding. And that's I think the most concrete, the most effective idea I've heard yet. Put this on the front burner at department head level under our city government and have a person in charge who's accountable for performance. And I think that's just really important to have that accountability.
Thanks a lot, John. I think that's sounding like a major issue that all the representatives on the SIC are going to take back to the people that they're giving input to. I don't see any more. Well, Susie, you're unmuted. Okay, go ahead.
Mary, is this the right time to talk about some low-hanging fruit that I hope that we as a group push, and that is to really encourage the city to speed up its look at the waste hauling system that we have, and perhaps we can cut emissions by what Bob has suggested before and that I introduced for him to City Council. They're going to do a study, but I would like our group to really push that idea so that hopefully with looking at what we have for waste hauling and the emissions and the construction road problems that are caused by those trucks that crisscross the same paths all the time, it might also lower costs for all of us. And we can do something maybe about solid waste if we can figure out a way that we can get things picked up that aren't right now. Is this a good time to encourage that?
I think all of these ideas are definitely ones that these representatives will want to take back to the city. Amy,
I want to, oh yeah, excuse me, Susie. I just want to say thank you for bringing that up, and to the other SIC members who are here. I don't know if you've all had this happen, but I think probably 100% of my input gathering events have somebody who brings this issue up, and they do it in a very similar way that you just did it, Susie. Like, I'm so sorry, but I really want to talk about this waste hauling issue. And it's really, really remarkable. I wish that we were all writing this down. And we can chat again as a SIC member, but thank you for bringing that up, Susie. And I'll pass it over to Amy Erica.
Okay, Amy Erica has asked a question in the chat. How would the position that has been proposed that Bob Haug talked about, that John just endorsed, the position in the city, how would that differ from what Mary Rankin does already?
I know that the Iowa City has a designated climate action plan coordinator, and Mary Rankin is currently splitting her time with the city of Ames and Iowa State. So that's a very huge job for one person. The city of Des Moines has a sustainability department with a manager. They had a fantastic Green Iowa AmeriCorps member helping them last year as well. They have a number of people there. Of course, we're not as big as Des Moines, but there are cities who do have a position like this. I see Carolyn or John has their hand up. Bob, did you want to add something about that too?
Well, I guess I was about to say what you already said, that she's got a lot on her plate right now, and we need somebody who can step up. We've already heard that they can't do the waste hauling study until after another study gets done. Well, why can't we do more than one thing at a time? And you know, some of us attended a webinar on Friday put on by SSG, the consultant from British Columbia that's working with the city. And in the takeaways from the Glasgow summit that they talked about, one of them is that cities must avoid lock-in immediately. And what that refers to is we have to make decisions now that don't lock us in to future emissions. So if we're going to spend, say, $100,000 on a particular kind of vehicle, that's going to be a relatively high emitter of greenhouse gases. What would be the cost difference of getting an electric vehicle or some other hybrid vehicle? And this would apply to the motors and machines that we have in all city operations, to the buildings we build, to the roads we build, so that we don't lock in emissions for the future. And that's something that an office like this could demand of departments when they come forward with an idea. Have you evaluated the future emissions of this decision versus other alternatives? That's it.
Okay, John?
I just make two comments. First of all, about the problem with so many haulers in the city. This is really an antitrust legal problem that needs to be worked on. And I don't know that there's a solution to it other than perhaps having the city take over solid waste collection. It's called the state action immunity from antitrust laws. Waste management got to where it is today by aggressively suing municipalities all over the country for violating restraint of trade laws, by trying to say who were the winners and losers in the waste collection business. But if the state or the city does it, they're exempt from antitrust laws under the state action immunity, which applies to cities also. So it's a big step for the city. We've never done waste collection, although Des Moines has for years. So that's one of the issues. And the I guess that's all I really have to say.
position.
Well, the position of a department head, Mary like you said, she has a lot on her plate, and she's serving 2 masters. And I think that, you need to focus, and be accountable. And so I think Des Moines and Iowa City are models we can look at. They don't necessarily define what we do, but they set a precedent. It's a good precedent, and I think we need to follow up on it.
Thank you very much. And Janet did put her comment in the chat. I would tell you also that we will be recording the chat, and not only our discussion, but the chat as well. So that will be available to people afterwards. I'm thinking, let's see, it's 8:03 now, according to my watch, and we have not approached the second question yet. So if you are willing to hang in there for a while longer, let's look at the second question and see how much our discussion for the first question has sort of brought us to the second topic. What are your desired outcomes from the Ames Climate Action Plan? And what does Ames look like when the plan is implemented? And I guess one thing I would say to start it off is if we have 20% more tree cover, Ames will look greener. So anybody want to address that question and just follow the same procedure? Either unmute your mic or raise your hand. Unless I'm doing this wrong, I don't see that anybody has contributed anything or wants to contribute anything.
There's one comment in chat commenting about cleaner air.
Better public transit is another one. That's Amy Erica. And Amy Erica, would you elaborate on that just a bit?
Yeah, we have a great public transit system for a city of our size, as I think many of us are proud. But I think there are things that we can do even better with respect to public transit that will help reduce emissions and just make the city more livable for everybody, particularly for low-income people and students.
Okay, there is another comment here, better bicycle connectivity for the community. And safer pathways through the town by bike. I guess that's the same. Darla Ewalt says, I would hope that our trees would be diversified to help control disease. That certainly is a long-term view, because if tree diseases spread less easily, it keeps our green canopy available. I can not see anyone else here who is asking to be recognized. Oh, Ralph, okay.
Well, with the question saying, what's our desired outcome, what we'd like to see? I mean, I would like to see people, let's say in 5 years from now, leave Ames saying Ames has really sped up this process, and that we're just as good, if not better, than Iowa City and Des Moines and Dubuque. I'd like the citizens, whether they're students here temporarily or white hairs like gray hairs like many of us, to say that's what we're leaving for our kids and our grandkids in 5 years, but that we know it. We know, because I don't know if people can think about it. We have kids 29 and 32, and climate change is, in a sense, beyond their thought process right now. So in 4 or 5 years, if they can look back and say, here's tangible things that happened. Here's a cause and effect. Here's what we did differently with transportation and housing or what have you. Then I think it's going to be important, which reinforces people saying, let's do things with great consideration for lower income people. But I want to see people think about it. I wonder, I mean, I know people talk about transparency, but I wonder how much people know about this. Well, what the league is doing is great to do it, but even more so people know about it, and then we can praise ourselves in 5 years from now.
Okay, thanks, Ralph. Well, if there's, there's a hand. Oh, Marcia? You need to unmute.
Yeah, I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I would like to see the plastic problem is resolved, that there's plastic recycling close to Ames. And also, we're a college community, and mattresses are a big problem too. And I'd like to see those two issues looked at.
Okay, we have a lot more comments in the chat, and all of you can actually go to the chat and read those. I don't have to read them for you. This is Rick Exner says the city requires small trees. How much sequestration comes from that? I don't know if there's anybody here who can answer that question or not. Do we have any foresters who can help us with that? Or if Chris Atkinson is still with us. I don't know whether he is or not. Okay, that's something I guess that we need to refer to someone. Bob Haug has given a response to Janet's chat. Leanne says another aspect would be taking tree waste and turning it into biochar. And Sue Jarnican has said something that I think echoes what Ralph was just saying. Education about the environment, ecology, and biology is paramount. And we're talking about native prairie. She's possible city credits for people converting lawns to native prairie plantings. And convincing your neighbors that that's an okay thing to do. There are some of these things that we're talking about which not only require our own change in our own thinking and our own psychology, but change in expectations in psychology in general. That is, that a lawn is the best way to surround your house. When this is lawns have only been in existence 150 years, about the same amount of time that we've started really putting stuff in the atmosphere to change our environment. So I think
I'd
that
like to talk to that one very briefly. There is a program that many places are doing that's called the Cool Blocks program, which starts with a neighborhood block getting together and talking about what they can do to work towards a better climate, and things like deciding that they're going to allow and encourage prairie plantings or more trees is something that a block can do. And this is being very successful in some areas. It's a very bottoms up part of the process.
a good thing to pass on to the people who are making decisions. Okay, we have gone over our potential hour, but I think it's certainly been worth it. Leanne, did you still want your hand to be up, or was that? Okay, thank you. I thank everyone so very much for coming and participating. There's lots of really good thought and ideas out there. pass this on to your neighbors, to your relatives, to everybody else in the community. We need to get as many people as possible involved in this decision-making process. So thank you all very much. We will terminate this meeting unless somebody's telling me I can't. And we will have available the recordings both of the chat and of the meeting itself. So thanks everyone for participating and the SIC people for attending as well.
Thank you, Mary. Good job. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mary.
Good night.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, Leanne, were you recording the
I
chat?
had chat, yes. I've seen
Okay. Okay, if you've got the chat, I'll do the rest.
And if you wait just a second, I'll duplicate that on my other computer so I have it on both.
Okay.
All right, now it should be on both computers.
Okay, thanks.